Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Inland Wetlands Watercourse Commission meeting. This is a special meeting, so the only thing we can talk about is what's on the agenda. Is there any citizens here who want to talk about anything that's not on the agenda? Just have a question or comment? If not, even though it's not on the agenda, I want to approve the minutes to last month's meeting. Anybody go over them? Everybody look at them. If you have any corrections, deletions, additions? If not, like a motion to accept the minutes.
Commissioner Rogan will make a motion to accept the minutes of December 6, 2022 as written.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Next, we're going to open a public hearing to application 22-10W, proposal by the Connecticut Self-Storage of Berlin LLC to construct a commercial storage facility discharging stormwater runoff into both upland review and area in the wetlands on lot 13, block 119 at 2200 Berlin Turnpike. Can I have a motion to open a public hearing?
Commissioner Rogan will make a motion to open a public hearing for application 22-10W.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Up for the.
Good evening, Chair, Commission members. My name is Andrew Burke, professional engineer and principal, Kratzer Jones and Associates. I'm not sure how typically with this room you have presenters and between the screen and everyone where best, but I'm happy to move.
This, I think this is fine.
Yeah. Okay, so the proposal before you is Connecticut Self-Storage Facilities for a location at 2200 Berlin Turnpike. Here tonight, myself, again, Andrew Burke, professional engineer and principal. I'm here for my partner, Jim Sikonchik, who's away, but I am familiar with the design and can present and try to answer questions. Also from Kratzer Jones is Joe Dran, and from the Ecological Project to talk about the wetlands and soil science aspects. The site, again, is 2200 Berlin Turnpike. It's located across the street from the Best Western Hotel and adjacent to the Lombardo motor car facility. Flip to the site board. And on the plans that you have before you, Berlin Turnpike is towards the bottom of the sheet, and the Lombardo's motor cars is adjacent. The site, not shown on this sheet, but on the sheet E1 shows the topography. Generally drains in a northerly direction. There is an area of wetlands in the northeast corner along the Berlin Turnpike within the right-of-way, and then that continues westerly through a easement towards Tollgate Road. About a third of the site drains northeasterly toward that pocket and the swale of the wetlands going westerly. The remainder of the site goes north directly towards that wetland area. In the proposed design, we mimic that same pattern and keep the same sub-watershed areas and treat the facility in that manner. As far as the site layout, there's a site access that's proposed right at where the present dual left turn lane is already set up on the Berlin Turnpike, so a logical entrance for the site that works well there. You would enter the site, and then there's an entrance facility here. I can show the architecture where there's an office and security for the facility, and then there's a one-way flow direction around all of the access to the self-storage units, and then back out to the same one curb cut and access to Berlin Turnpike. For drainage design, there's a series of catch basins that drain out towards the west, and then the small entrance area here that drains by a leak off to a water quality basin here. Again, mimicking that flow of about a third of the site that goes northeasterly. This drainage system connects to a larger detention basin and then discharges out in the same manner towards the wetlands. There is zero increase in runoff achieved through the 100-year storm event through both facilities, and also water quality with a minimum of 80% removal of total suspended solids through the site as well through the two facilities. On the detail sheet, there's specific detail. We've tried to work very close with town staff, and I know Jim worked with staff. There's a particular insert that the town prefers for water quality treatment. Included that in the plans, and that's on there as well. The alternates that were considered whenever there's a activity, and this is a public hearing that I think was more for public interest rather than significant, but just the same. We always try to lay out alternates that were considered to show how we came about this design. First, an alternate with the zone that's here is that there are more active sites, more intensive use sites that are allowed in the zone. Self-storage facilities don't have a lot of vehicular traffic and thereby don't have a lot of creation of pollutants compared to some other more intensive higher parking facility sites or higher trucking facility sites of that nature. So it's a lower impact use for the zone in terms of the pollutant loadings generated by the site. Also the intensity of the expanse of the site. So this alternative and this use is a quieter and less intensive use than what's allowed by some of the zoning. The site was developed with multi-level buildings that work with the grades that go down towards the west. So this larger building in the middle, this side of the access site is at the second floor, and then you drop down like a walkout, like a house to a lower level here. So this type of use also works well with the grades compared to other pad sites that would need one flat pad. We're able to tier and work with the grades and have less impact grades. Also, in the northwest portion, there's a proposed retaining wall, and that's to limit the grading from going into the buffer. As an alternative, it could have just been sloped and still would have been outside the wetlands, but this retaining wall at its highest point being 12 feet, and the cost of that is to further prevent any impact into even the buffer. There are no direct wetlands impacts. Also shown on this plan is just all the buffering and the distance from the residential properties, from the wetlands. There's at least 90 feet to the building on the back and the westerly side. The building itself doesn't have any doors on the back, so there wouldn't be noise or anything that would be generated from that side of the building. On the north side, there's still at least 90 feet to the property line. And then on the front, there's 100 feet. There'll be screening in addition. Those are proposed white pines for screening along the front, along the Berlin Turnpike. So we believe that the proposal you have before you is the least impact and prudent alternative design. With that, I think I'll turn the presentation over to George Logan and maybe take questions collectively at the end.
That's fine.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. George Logan for the record, Green Ecological Services. Happy New Year. So, just by way of background, since this is a public hearing, just give you a little bit of my qualifications. I hold a master's degree in natural resources science, concentration, conservation biology, several certifications. So, scientist, wetland scientist, ecologist, wildlife biologist in various societies. I've been practicing the field, I think, a little over 35 years. And I've been before this commission numerous times. According to my estimation from the number that you see in my job, I have been here 71 times. So I've been keeping account. This is since 1990. Before that, it was many more times than I was here from another country. Anyway, so first time that I looked at this site, was back in 2021, September. And then there was a sort of a hiatus in the development because certain things have to happen for this development to be allowed in this zone. So I went back out to the site and this past September was almost later. One of the first things that I always do, I was not the person who did the original wetland remediations. You all probably remember Tom Petros, whom I've worked. Actually, he was my mentor in soil science when I first started back in 1989. So one of the first things that I did is to verify that the wetland remediation was substantially correct. Of course, it is because it's so obvious that it's a difficult slope because there's been historic disturbance in the site for many, many years. Another thing that I always do that factors in somewhat to figuring out functions and values of a particular wetland is to look at the aerial photographs that go, the archival ones that go back all the way to 1934, which, as you know, are or online, various sources, including the Connecticut State Library. Back in 1934, the site was in agriculture, more or less corner to corner. It was row crops, it was an orchard. In the 50s, the crops were abandoned and the orchard remained. In 65, a form of excavation that started in the southern portion, a narrow portion of the site. We're thinking that it's probably rock quarrying because there's a little bit of basalt intrusion in the southern portion. And you can kind of see that, of course, basalt is something that was marketable and still is. And then in the 1990s, the site was disturbed again, and it was devoid of significant woody vegetative cover almost corner to corner. That was allowed to vegetate until 2008, when most of the woody vegetation was again cleared. And in September 2010, Google Earth aerial shows significant grading activities within the portions of the site, especially the area that is proposed for development. And then it was allowed to vegetate. A lot of the vegetation is invasive species, not all of them. So now we have an open area in the middle. And then we have what we call ruderal forest off to the edges of the wetlands. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of what's mostly on site, which is uplands. There's very little wetland that actually is on the site, but it surrounds it. So the wetland we call it a semi-perennial watercourse. The government wants to call it intermittent. We're calling it semi-perennial. It's about 200 or so acres watershed. The water comes in and basically wraps around, comes off to Tollgate Road. For the most part, it's a ditched watercourse. It has significant, especially as it turns the corner, significantly eroded banks, depositional areas. Probably of past issues, not so much recently. Probably sometimes we get bigger storms and it does move things around. As far as soils are concerned, because of the disturbance and the area that we're proposal that's happening, for the most part, you call those, it's a mapping units, that's disturbed. It's not much as far as non-disturbed soils in the site until you get back to the far southern portion. As far as the wetlands are concerned, again, disturbed soil types, especially hugging the property, what we call a fluviquence, which is a alluvial type recent development. We have equines, which again, disturbed wetland unit. And then as you go off to the north, it's a larger wetland. So most of the wetland is to the north of the site. It includes forested, scrub, shrub, and virgin cover types. There are some areas close to the site that are dominated by Phragmites. So we're always dealing with that when we have a watershed that is mostly urbanized. If you look at the USGS stream stats, it's one of the things that we look at and kind of get an idea of what the watershed looks like, because it allows us to understand what the functions and values of a particular wetland are. I'm going to get the numbers. By the way, there is a report that I put into the record with the date of October 18th. It's quite some time ago. So the last page tells me that this particular watershed is urbanized. 44.1% of it is developed. It has an average percentage of impervious area, 15.9, 16%. Anytime you go above 10%, you know that you have an impacted water quality already, which is quite obvious. So that kind of gives you a quick idea of what's there as far as the resource. Again, vegetative diversity is not particularly high, especially surrounding the site. If you go off several hundred feet off to the north, it becomes obviously a lot more diverse, but that's kind of grading towards the site. We're not grading to it, kind of going around the corner and into this ditch watercourse and pipe system. So I give you a little bit on the past land use, a little bit on the soils, all that's in the report. We have a little bit on the wetlands and the water course. Obviously, we've got several types of hydrologic regimes. You have the water course, which we're calling semi-perennial. What does that mean? It's kind of a high order intermittent stream. Federal government since they call it intermittent stream bed. And in the back of the report, I have what I call a wetland information characterization field form, which has a whole laundry list of the kinds of plants and other things that characterize the wetland. Functions and values, it's always something that we talk about, especially when we have a public hearing. Again, most of the wetland that I characterize with these functions is really off-site, not on-site. But you always look at the ecological unit. You can't just say, well, because we have 7,000 square feet of wetland at the site, that's all we characterize about. It's all part of something else. So you have to look at the whole thing. And what I showed, and this is, we utilize a wetland function value analysis that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer has adapted. We use professional judgment. And what we're trying to figure out is of the classic functions and values, functions being the things that are intrinsic to the wetland, whether humanity is there or not. Values is what we derive as humans, like flood control, for instance. If you look at these classical ones, some of them are what we call principal functions. Those are the ones that are conferred at a higher rate than some of the others. And not surprisingly, the ones that we tagged on as principal values are what we call sediment toxic and pathogen retention. That's something that wetlands do. We all know they do that, sometimes to their own detriment. And then nutrient removal, obviously. So those are the principal functions. All the others, including wildlife habitat, production, export, recreation, educational, those are all secondary. So they're there to lower than average. So now let's talk a little bit about proposed conditions. That's very simple. Very often I'm like, oh, great, I have a site that doesn't have permanent or temporary impacts, direct impacts. This one doesn't. There are no direct impacts. That's good, obviously. And also not only that, but we're at least 50 feet away from this offsite resource with any development that's being proposed. So the buffer is being left alone to do what it does today. So usually when I look at proposed impacts, I look at what I call direct physical impacts and indirect. Those are the types of things that we always look at. Long-term and short-term. Obviously no direct impacts, so now we're looking at the indirect impacts. So we look at short-term erosion sedimentation control. As I've looked at the plans, this applies with the 2002 guidelines for erosion sedimentation control and any amendments that have come along the line. And so I've looked at the detailed erosion sedimentation control plan. The dominant soils in the areas to be graded are exposed that have low to low moderate erodibility. A lot of these slopes are flat and gentle, so that's all good things. So I don't see in the short term an adverse impact of the wetlands. Long term, look at removal of native vegetation that's associated, because the buffer does some good things to the function of the wetland, right? If you have a good buffer, it protects the wetland. And for the most part, very little mature vegetation is being taken out, maybe with the exception of, hey, we have to get down to the resource with our outlet as to the extent that we need. So that's getting a little closer. Another potential physical impact is changes of wetland hydrology. We have a big watershed, we're really not affecting that. We're not denying any water or making it wetter and therefore maybe killing some trees, say, we have more water. So that's a category that there are no physical impacts, there are no changes. And then we talked a lot about water quality. This complies with the 2004 Water Quality Manual. We hit the 80% KSS removal is the minimum. And if you look at what's been done, you look at the 2004 Central Program, you see that is an above ground primary treatment system according to that manual. Sediment pretreatment and the water quality volume that is required in order to be able to say that it does have, that it meets these guidelines, it meets the standards for the 80% situation. Deep some catch basins, water quality basin, and sediment 4 base for that also included. So the conclusion there is that there's not going to be a long-term impact to the water quality, to the hydrology, out the wetland itself. So, in final conclusion, as a wetland scientist, having reviewed the plans, having been on the site a couple of times, it is my conclusion that there's no adverse long-term or short-term significant impact to the wetland resources that you look at. And there you have it, gentlemen. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Anybody?
50-foot buffer there. We're going to leave all the stuff there. It's growing there now.
Yeah, it's as I said, it's what we call rootal forest, which means it was cut down and it's growing back. So it's these kinds of species that like this post-agricultural, post-cutting. So they're not big trees, except when you go right along the edge of the property, the trees have been left alone, large trees. So what you have is smaller trees, pole-sized trees, 8 to 10 inches diameter in most cases. Okay, thank you. And there are pictures in the report which show that.
Excuse me, I guess from our standpoint too is, we asked the question last time, there's going to be automobiles stored there, like I said, but they're not going to be able to be worked on. They're not going to be, there's no running water to these facilities, so they're not going to be able to go out there and wash their cars. Okay.
Storage, my understanding is there are people who store them inside the unit that they don't have to work.
We've made conditions where they're going to have those special sponges installed. So for
Anybody else? Jimmy, have any? Anybody from the audience that have any questions for either the gentlemen? If not, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close public hearing 2210-W.
second.
All in favor? Right. And now I'd like to have a motion to either accept or deny application 22-10W.
Make a motion to accept application 22-10W.
Have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good luck, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Next up in the public hearing is application 22-11W, proposal by Teresa Dinardi to construct drainage improvements discharging stormwater runoff within an upland review area on lot 88-1, block 91, 359 Fort Rod Road. Can I have a motion to open a public hearing?
Make a motion to open public hearing for application 22-11W.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Up for the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Wilson Carroll. It's good to be back. I am an attorney with Cohen & Wolf in Bridgeport, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Teresa Dinardi, 359. Also with me tonight is Eric Peterson from Gardner & Peterson Associates LLC. He's the engineer who drafted this plan. He'll be available to answer questions. We are asking tonight for approval of these proposed improvements to the existing drainage system on the property that will prevent this lawn from flooding without any adverse impacts to the creek that's on the property or to her neighbors. As a refresher from last month, the town maintains a culvert under 4 Rod Road, which discharges out of a drainage pipe on the west side of the property here. The volume of stormwater coming from that pipe has increased over the last few years as development in the area has taken place. And that stormwater is currently exiting this drainage pipe and sheet draining east, flooding the property and causing disruption along that. before that water ultimately flows into the water course on the east of the property, which is demarcated on that line there. This plan before you tonight is the result of collaboration that's already taken place between the applicant and the town. Mike Ahern visited the property and has reviewed this plan. He made several comments which were incorporated into the plan and in accordance with the recommendations that he made. So this system calls for the installation of an 18-inch HDPE pipe, which will be fed by a storm manhole on an easement to be conveyed to the town. This spot here. The approved system discharges at a point approximately 350 feet to the east of the current discharge point. And the system includes a clean out area for the storm manhole and discharges onto a concave preformed riprap pad to reduce the velocity of the discharge of that water. This proposed discharge point is within the upland review area, which is why it's a regulated activity. Stormwater from the existing system already drains into that over the lawn and into the creek. But these proposed improvements will control the velocity of the stormwater, remove sediment from stormwater, and will reduce flooding and disruption with no negative impact to that creek. Ms. Donardi's neighbors will also be unaffected by these proposed improvements. Many abutting neighbors will actually see an improvement to the existing conditions because their water will pass by those properties before it ultimately discharges closer to the water course. These last three properties here, which are 40, 48, and 56 Winding Meadow Drive, may not necessarily see any improvement as a result of this plan, but the existing conditions will not change. The drainage improvements don't add or remove any stormwater from the system. They just shift that discharge to the east so that the water will have a much shorter trip to its ultimate destination. And I'll turn it over now to Mr. Peterson to comment on specifics of the plan, and then we're happy to answer.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eric Peterson. I'm a professional engineer and licensed land surveyor from Gardner and Peterson Associates. As I've never been before this commission before, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a third generation professional engineer, land surveyor. So I've essentially been in this business my entire life. My grandfather started a company and my father, myself, and my brother are in it. I graduated UConn in '97 with a bachelor's in civil engineering. I got my PE license in '04 and my surveyor's license in 2011. And over the past 20 years, I've designed countless drainage systems for commercial, industrial, residential, you name it, developments, and presented those applications to numerous wetlands commissions, planning and zoning commissions all over the state. So happy to be here for the first time. So in 2021, we were retained by Ms. Donardi to design this stormwater system extension, as I like to call it. So we initially went out, we did a survey of our property, we did a topographic survey, boundary survey, and put a plan together. We then determined the watershed that contributes to this pipe that crosses under Ford Rod Road right here. And that watershed is an area to the south, to the west somewhat. And we also determined, what contributes to that watershed, as in how much impervious coverage, how much woodlands, how much grasslands, so that we could determine quantify a flow rate of water going through that pipe. And therefore, we can then design a new pipe to handle that amount. The town engineer had instructed us that we design the new pipe to handle a 25-year storm, which roughly is a 6-inch rainfall over a 24-hour period. So that's pretty substantial. So as Attorney Carroll mentioned, we selected an 18-inch plastic culvert. The reason for 18-inch, the current culvert is currently 12-inch. We wanted to increase the size so that we could actually flatten the pipe and get it as deep into the ground as we can. What that does is it reduces velocities. Within the pipe, it reduces velocities as it exits the pipe. We also have a riprap scour hole, which is a riprap depression, which will reduce the velocities coming out even more so that we don't have any erosion problems. Sure, it slows that water down. We also looked at the, I looked at the NRCS soils database to see what the soils are like on this property. And NRCS classifies them, rightfully so, I guess, as Berlin silt loam, which I think is just a coincidence. But the Berlin series is one, it's a silt loam as opposed to a sandy loam, which means that the soil has more fines in it, which is easily compactable. Water doesn't go through it as easily as a figure of sand would. And they classify its capacity to transmit water within the soil itself as to be low, which means that not a lot of water can seep into the ground as opposed to, you know, complete opposite end of the spectrum is a gravelly soil. Okay, so you have a gravelly soil, you have a wetland, which is, you know, the opposite of that, and we're pretty close to a wetland as far as the capacity of the soil to intake water. So the reason I bring that up is that right now the water comes across the road, and it just meanders through the property, through the lawn, which is entirely grass, by the way. And it doesn't get too much infiltration into the ground, thereby stating that we're not changing the amount of water that's coming into the pipe, and the amount of water, so the amount of water that comes out of the pipe should be exactly the same. So it's my understanding that there's some residents that have either voiced their concerns or written their concerns because water coming from this area gets into the wetland, which is this blue line here. It travels to the wetland, gets into a water course, and then heads in a northerly direction, and it crosses under Winding Meadow Drive. And I just want to make sure that that pipe's not going to be over its capacity based on what we're doing here. And in my opinion, we're not increasing the flow of water from this improvement to that pipe, so there should be no change whatsoever to those pipes going underneath the road. I previously discussed the project with Attorney Carroll, and I do support his statements that he had just made previously, where I concur that we're not increasing stormwater runoff downstream properties. I don't feel that we'll have any adverse effects to the wetlands, to the animal life in the wetlands, the plant life in the wetlands, or cause any sedimentation or erosion controls, problems, as long as the plans are followed by the contractor. So, if you have any questions? We're good.
Anybody on the commission have questions?
I'm just curious, you've made statements that the last 3 properties won't see any increase in water on their property. What studies specifically have you done that verify that statement?
So there's not
Is it just topography, or?
Right, it's not a particular study with respect to this property and this plant specifically, but because the amount of water that's crossing west to east is not going to change, there will still, to the extent that there is a flooding issue along this water, that's not going to necessarily be improved for every single homeowner. But the amount of water is the same that is traveling from this pipe, whether it's going to sheet drain across the property as it is currently, or whether it discharges at this point and has a very short way to travel to the
But water that used to seep across sort of southeast, I guess, and get to that creek through the wetland, now all that water is discharging up by that 3rd property from the left. How do we know that none of it's going to go north from there?
Because those properties are higher.
Right, well, that was kind of what I was getting at.
Yep. So right now there's like a natural, not natural, who knows? But this is a low area between the Denardi property and the properties to the north, where all the water coming out of the pipe just continues in this general direction right here and flows as it will.
So even at the far end of, the top right corner of this, all those properties are above that discharge point.
No, this discharge point water is going to get into the brook, and then it follows the brook, and this brook then continues and goes northerly underneath Winding Meadow Drive through some culverts.
And none of it's going to go north from that riprap.
No, nope.
because of
Because
elevation.
they are high, they are higher. Yeah, we're getting this water. And that was actually one of the comments that the town engineer or Jim made to us, was that we initially had it actually a little bit closer to the property line, and they asked us just to move it down a little bit, to direct it as we have further from their property lines.
And the rate of discharge into that creek isn't going to go up?
No. The only water that's in that pipe is the water that's coming from across the street.
But so what you're saying is that as the water comes out from the town's culvert, and it could be directed into that pipe, it's the same in the end, because what was explained to us the last time is that the reason why she's doing this is because the water would come down and flood her property.
So right now it just discharges here and it meanders very slowly this way.
But it also comes south, right, into her property.
Well, this is her property right here.
But it comes further. What you're
not go this way, if that's what.
Yes, it doesn't go that way.
I don't think it goes that way. No.
Well, you don't think, or you know that.
The elevation at this point right here is 52. The elevation up here is 53.
Okay.
So it all stays this way. You can see by her pool house, and there's actually a pool in there. This is higher than this area.
But is there a lot of standing water? You said the soil is not. It's a tendency of holding water.
There's some water there. That I was there. Last time I was there was yesterday morning, and there's water, a little puddle like at the end of this pipe, and as you walk down there, it's soggy.
And I watched the line as well on the day after it rained, and this whole strip is extremely flooded. Now, as you said, like the soil is poorly drained, even here. So the soil for the rest of the lawn has a tendency to become flooded as well, but not as a result of the flooding.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is it appears to me that you're going to have more water coming out of the end of that pipe when that pipe is in than it's coming right now, because you're going to have water seeping down into her property.
There's the same amount of water coming out of this pipe as comes out of that pipe. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
It's the exact same amount of water coming out of that pipe and that pipe, because there's no other inlet to this pipe.
So if the concern
okay,
was...
so hold on, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
So we're going from, this pipe goes across the street, and there's no other inlet. We just have a manhole with a cover on it,
right?
Just a connection, and then it continues down. So the only water that could be in this pipe has to enter here across the street.
And if I'm understanding your concern correctly, is that you're worried that water that's currently moving down on this
right
map. Right, but I think the elevation is higher here, so I don't think that's what's.
I don't see anything moving north. I also don't see anything moving south. Nonetheless, it all goes east into the wetland.
So,
and it all goes into the brook.
Okay.
No matter what, it all goes into the brook.
Then maybe I don't understand why is she concerned about her property flooding?
I don't know if flooding is the right word. I think her property is just soggy.
Okay, why is she worried about her property being soggy if the water isn't going down that far?
Yeah, how is this going to fix that?
Yeah.
Well, this entire stretch here will be significantly less flooded when it rains.
Okay, so more water is going into that pipe than if her property is getting soggy, not wet, and I won't use flooded, soggy, the water's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, it comes from the end of that pipe.
Okay, so now you're taking that pipe, this town's pipe, and you're adding to that pipe, so that her property is no longer going to get soggy. So more water is going to end up in that pipe down the other end.
Since the soil is poorly drained, the water is currently exiting from this pipe and moving down here. So the water.
So her property is still going to get soggy.
This part of her property will not be influenced by the water coming from us.
Well, let me ask a quick question. You look at the southerly boundaries of all those parcels to the north. Will there be any regrading on the north side of the culvert to pick up any runoff from those parcels and direct it down towards the outlet?
Will you be constructing will you be swaling that area so that the surface water also runs towards the outlet?
So the surface water coming from these properties here, which comes from them onto us,
right,
will be directed in an easterly direction. It'll come down and it'll run parallel with the pipe to the wetland, which is another contribution to the soggy area. I'm pointing to here, but I'm really pointing to here.
So is that, and to Jim's point, that's a change from today? Is that, or is that?
It currently comes down this way, and it concentrates in this swath here.
There's standing water at times.
Yeah. So what we're doing, the water comes out of this pipe and it meanders through the lawn and makes it soggy, and continues and continues and continues. More water comes down, continues, and gets into the brook. Okay. What we're just doing is taking this water that comes through here, and we're kind of skipping that part of it and discharging it here, so that it's not soggy in through here. But if you're asking if there's more water, the only way there can be more water is if we're adding more water on the inlet.
But it's got to come out.
Right, the same amount comes in as goes out.
What's coming out or onto our?
But just
I'm
hold on.
sorry.
Hang on, we'll get everyone here wants to speak, but let us. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand that, but if you're saying you're gonna, at our culvert, the town's culvert, you're putting a pipe there, and no water's gonna escape.
Correct.
Right, and this end down here, all the water's gonna discharge down there. Her property is not gonna be soggy anymore, correct? Okay, so, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
More water is gonna be in that pipe because the water is no longer gonna be in her property, getting her property soggy.
Would that be fair to say that that would be a swale kind of situation over the top of that pipe in addition to the pipe to catch surface?
On the north side of it only, not on top of it.
I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
If I may, the water that is currently draining from west to east along the surface,
Right.
will be moved underground into the pipe. But the same water flows from west to east, and the same water ends up.
And it used to maybe take 2 or 3 days for it to get to that point, but now it's going to get there in a matter of minutes, hours, whatever.
But I think that the velocity dissipation and the sediment controls that are built into the plan are intended to address exactly that.
That is true. And the watershed of this brook is significantly larger than the watershed of our pipe. And the significance of that is that when the concern is that the pipes that are going under the road, Winding Meadow here, if there's a problem, it's obviously going to be at the peak of the storm coming through, and the peak of this watershed of this brook heading that way. Since this is such a smaller watershed, even if this water does go a little bit quicker, it's going to go under Winding Meadow Drive way before the peak comes through, because this is an enormous watershed here. This is a smaller watershed. The peak of this is going to come through. Hours going to go by. This is going to go through. This is like something we work on when we do much larger drainage studies. But back to Mr. Chairman, your questions. I know I'm doing a bad job of.
I just don't understand
explaining this to you.
Well, I mean, so what I guess what I'm going to say is that why is she going to spend this kind of money if her property is still going to be soggy?
It's not going to be soggy.
So where's that water going?
All right, so the water comes out the pipe as opposed to coming out of the pipe here.
So more water is going into that pipe than right now.
All right, so why would, maybe you tell me why you think it's more water, and then maybe I can.
The rate of runoff will be much quicker.
Yeah.
At that point of the outlet.
At this point of the outlet.
Right.
It'll be exactly the same as at that point. There's no other water coming out of that pipe than coming out of that pipe. But after it comes out of this pipe, it's combined with other water coming from her lawn, coming from their lawns.
But it used to meander that 400 feet.
Along with all this other
And it would
water.
get soggy and it would take days to dry out.
So
now it's just going to go bang through the pipe and it's there.
But that's going to get through, which is going to lessen the amount of water in this area. And then when runoff comes from the neighbors and comes from her, just from regular rain, you know, it's less water to be combined with town water.
Yep.
So we've got like, you know, let me put this down. So we've got water coming from here. We've got water coming from here. It's combined with water coming out of here to get the maximum amount to make this the worst condition. We take this water out of the equation. That way in here, there's less water coming because it's just the water running off from the properties. And it's the same amount that comes from the end of this pipe when this all combines, it goes that way.
And I will say also that from the applicant's perspective, to the extent that the commission is interested in, you know, a little bit of a berm here that would direct the water, I think that that's something to accept as a commission.
So is it fair to look at this as that the line that pipe is going in is currently kind of a natural culvert? And now that
A natural
culvert's
swale.
A swale.
It's a very minor depression, yeah.
And now that swale is going to have a pipe underneath it.
Mhm.
Right. But it's all still going to the same spot.
And that's my point. It's all going to the same spot.
Yep.
That is my point.
What's the distance from that riprap to the wetland and to the creek? Just roughly. I mean, it's not a whole lot, right?
From the wetland, this is probably got like 10 feet from the edge of the stone
Yeah.
to the wetland. And then from the wetland to the creek, it's about 30 feet, I'd say roughly. And this is all currently lawn. We're not cutting down a tree to do any of this stuff. And then there's a wooded area in between the edge of the wetlands and the creek, which will remain the same.
And over that 30 feet, it's going to flow east and southeast and not north.
Correct. Yeah. That's the natural terrain.
Anybody else in the commission have? Now I will open it up to the public. Before, hang on. Whoever's going to speak, state your name and your address. And one at a time, please.
My name is Christopher Talbot. I live at 30 Winding Meadow Drive, which is the upper level of Winding Meadow. My property actually borders along where the pipe will be. So I have certain concerns about the pipe and how it will affect my property, but I suspect it's going to be far less effect than my neighbors who live further downstream. So I want to just touch base on some of the inaccuracies that, or naiveties that were just told in regards to that water. I've lived here for 35 years. Over the time, we've had a couple of different developments that occurred upstream, and every single time there has been one, it's been to the detriment of the people that have been downstream. It has increased the water in our backyards or throughout the back area. In regards to your question on whether or not this pipe, the outflow is going to be the same as the inflow, it's not. Because currently, when the water comes through this pipe, it comes out and it disseminates through parts of the yard. It disseminates part of this section of their yard. It doesn't just stop here. It comes down through this section behind. So a lot of this will sit there for a period of time. And it doesn't just flow through within a half an hour or an hour. It might be there for a day or two. If they do this with the pipe, that water is going to be flowing through from the H55 community. It's going to blow down through here and come out of here at one time within minutes of it getting into the property. Now, for me, it's probably going to be pretty good because it's bypassing my yard. And as long as the contractor, the landscapers properly, smooth it out and make sure the grading is proper, I'm going to be in a better position. I want you to know some clarity. Right now, when the water comes through this pipe and water comes down these properties, by the time it hits here, you got a stream, a heavy stream of around 6 to 8 feet wide couple inches wide, and they're blowing through there on a heavy rain. If you're gonna do this with this pipe, and you have this little tiny culvert out here, it's acting as a catch basin, this is gonna fill up in around 5 minutes, and water's just gonna blow over it. And I think some of my neighbors would agree on that. My concern is, I don't want them to have water in them. They're nice people, but I don't want their problems to be eliminated at the extent of some of the other neighbors. And there's no way I can envision that having this pipe is going to lessen the erosion on that stream, because that's going to come through. It's coming straight to here. And if by any kind of miraculous way, I don't see any numbers up here as to level. Up here, I see 50 inches, 49 inches. So between my yard and the pipe, there might be a 1 inch, 2 inch difference.
That's feet.
Maybe. No, it says 51.2 to 50.6. That's feet.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have any problem with my yard then. But I don't see any numbers here on any of these lower properties. And I don't see any information on some of the properties farther down that have the biggest water problem. Right here, I'm not seeing any numbers. And I suspect the Giove property is going to have the water coming out of this pipe, and before it gets to the stream, it's going to be flowing into their property. And as a result, it's going to bypass the stream going on down. That's the fear that I have. And that's all that I wanted to comment on at this point. My neighbors would have more information. If you guys, how it would affect that.
Hi, Lori Primich, 62 Winding Meadow Drive. We've lived in this community since 1987. We are the property that he so eloquently says a creek. We, on our property and our neighboring property, which isn't here, is where the water goes from that runoff, which when we bought the home, we were told it was just a runoff. It was never supposed to be running water. It was never supposed to be a stream or a brook. It was just supposed to be a runoff. Well, again, every time something is built and something changes, it all changes. We get less water, we get more water. That water has to go somewhere, and where it has to go, and if my house was here, I could show it. When it comes down here, he also made reference to the pipes going under Winding Meadow Drive. Those pipes are on my property. Okay, so that water is going to come down. It's going to go like this, or come from here, from whatever, which direction they're putting it, and go to one place, my backyard. Okay, so I have a lot to say about this. Nobody's ever approached us. Nobody's ever come up to us and said, how could we do something together? She's worried about a yard that's wet. All of our yards are wet. We're built on a swamp. Okay, this didn't just happen overnight. And as far as you asking questions, somebody did about trees, and they said, no, all the trees have been removed because they tried to do this already once without the town's approval. Okay, keep that in mind. All right.
Trees were cut down a couple years ago.
Yes.
And the soil level risen because of it.
Yeah. So there's been activity with this house for a long time with them trying to do something with the water on a house that they bought that had the water there. So I don't get it. That's just what I'm saying. And I just want to say, keep in mind that 62 Lori Primich is the house that's going to get this water. And if they're allowed to do this, we're going to be speaking, because this shouldn't be allowed. Our property shouldn't get flooded because they got smush in their yard. That's all I have to say.
Go ahead.
George Primich, 62 Winding Meadow Drive. To my wife's point, when this brook, we call it a brook, comes down, it makes a hard left turn into the pipes. So when that water flows, it actually almost hits a barrier coming this way, hits it, and it finally lets it go into the pipes. To your point with meandering, so, and Chris brought up a very good point. If it's going to meander, it's going to take a while before it goes into the creek. They understand it's pretty much going to grab all the water here. Now you're consolidating that into a pipe. It's gonna rush, and it's probably gonna fill this thing up less than 5 minutes. And before it could even hit this creek, it's gonna have to flood these yards over here. And even still, she's worried about her yard being soggy. Well, everything from the pool, this pool house and all these elevations are here. That culvert where they are is here. So all the water from here, it's still gonna be soggy. Nothing changes. This driveway is higher than all this. This whole yard is higher than this. So all the water from her yard, from the driveway, it's still gonna keep it soggy. You know, and to my wife's point, you know, I'd like to work with the neighbor to see if we can, you know, come up with a solution, but no one's ever approached us. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Tom Giobbe, 48 Winding Meadow Drive. So yes, I am directly impacted by this. This is my property here. I've been there since 1986. And the back of that yard is very soggy as it is without any change to water runoff to our backyards. Right now I have a shed that's over here. I have a fence that goes along here. This fence has a gate here, and the gate is like this because the post can't stay still because of the water underneath it. As it is right now, it's very wet back there. So what I have to do is get a couple bungee cords to try to tie the post to the fence gate so the dog doesn't. Now in the winter, after all the snow melts, the spring and all the rain, we have a hard enough time. I can't even cut grass from my shed to the back to the fence. To do what they want to do, it's gonna help them out, but it's gonna hurt all of us. So I would say, please don't let them do this.
We have a picture of our fence. The cement has dropped this much in the back because of the water.
Yeah, lost almost a foot.
We have a picture of it.
I have a small tree in my backyard. The level of the yard has rated so much, the roots are up this high, above ground. It's just going to get worse.
Have any questions for the neighbors?
Oh, I think we've heard.
We won't live with this for a long time.
Give our opinions. Opinions from the experts. And we're just quite curious if there were points that may have been made that we can be commenting on. Sure.
Well, I mean, I think me as on the commission, and I think the commission as a whole, want to understand the amount of water coming out of there. And he said, is that culvert big enough to capture it all without it going everywhere else but where it's supposed to go? And how far down, like the primerages, or you said you're not even on this map?
No.
We're the next house.
And you're,
that's where it stops and it turns.
It's my house there, his house next to it on the right, and then their house to the right of that.
And where the water stops, that's where the pipes are. It can't go any further. It drains a little bit from that end of the winding meadow down into those pipes. Very minimal. It's higher. It's a lot higher. Our yard is down here. The pipe it goes like this into two big underground pipes that brings it out. So the water is going to come and it's just going to get backed up, and it's going to get backed up and go where it can up our yard. And it's yard.
They took those trees out. It made it worse.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask a question through the chair to Mr. Peterson. Just a couple of quick questions. The depth of the Donardi's property off the top of your head, do you know how much farther to the east it runs beyond where you've surveyed at this point? Just a ballpark?
I would guess we're showing it maybe half their property of that map right there.
Okay.
So significantly further back.
do you think it would make sense to pick up some additional survey info down along the northerly boundary of the additional properties of Winding Meadow down to the culvert, the two twin box, or they're not box culverts, I think they're 36-inch culverts, just to see grade wise how we stand, so whatever runoff does run in that direction. If anything has to be done to keep it in that channel, get it into those cross culverts. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
You're still going to flood the yards out where that culvert is where you're at.
Well, let's get the proper information first. That's what we're requesting.
Because and do you have any more questions?
No.
Because right now, my concern in hearing from the town people here, I'm more concerned about their problems than her problem. They seem to have greater impact of doing this than having her property get soggy. So if any, I'd like more information. We'd like more information where you can correct or possibly correct further down to the other residents that aren't on this map and down to the culvert.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think what we need is an additional survey information along that northerly boundary in the area along the stream as the water course runs into the cross culverts. Perhaps some additional work may be included as a part of whatever activity takes place to ensure.
What I was going to say is they've got that area that they're talking about. It's not land that they're really using. Their pool, gazebo, their pool house, all the other stuff is up high. This is a small area, maybe about like this that they're talking about. That's soggy.
We're very
I wish mine was soggy.
Yeah, we're all living in sod for 30 years. We're curious why they want to do this and spend the money.
That's not fully true. Their back section towards the woods is pretty right after the woods. They don't use that because it's wet.
Well, we can't use our backyards near the.
Lori,
technically it's a regulated area.
One of the things is they're concerned with excess water sitting there. They've got a huge pond in their front yard that they bubble up every once in a while. Why can't they run it off into that?
Or somewhere else.
They've got a pond. They've got a little brook pond in their yes.
Yeah.
What about dry wells? What about other things? What are their other options they can do other than send it our way?
I mean, this is a little bit crazy. It's like being spoiled if you want. Right?
Can I ask just one other question? You were saying that the soil doesn't let the water absorb itself going down. It has to absorb some of it. So the some of it that absorbs doesn't come to us. You know what I mean? If it meanders, it's going to soak into the ground. And like I said, whatever doesn't soak in the ground, we end up getting when it comes to the brook. So now you're taking the stuff that used to meander around and you're consolidating it. And you're not giving it a chance to sit on the lawn, soak down, and it's soggy. Our yards are soggy. And then, it's.
Why can't we all just get along and live in sod? I mean, really,
I mean, if we can fix the problem, we'd like everyone happy, but that's why I think we're gonna get more information.
What happens if it is allowed and then all of a sudden we have just serious problems? Who's going to be responsible for that? What recourse? I mean, what is going to happen if they say, well, guess what?
Because we don't know what's going to happen.
We're assuming it's going to be bad because it's all coming towards us.
Well, I would hope that the information we get from the professionals.
We just got information from.
But we're going to expand. We're going to have them expand their. It's like we're going to. It's my opinion. I think we should continue the public hearing until next month. Get new information. That would hopefully possibly help the other residents.
Or at least help us better understand where the runoff is, where the water is going.
Right.
And can you include in that, like, I don't know how to say it, the rate of flow in getting to that creek? I mean, to the points everyone's making, that water sits for a while. Your point is it all gets there eventually. But it seems pretty clear, I think, that it's going to get there a lot quicker. So there's an increased flow rate. What impact is that going to have on our wetland and that creek with regard to erosion and so forth, particularly at this hard left turn before it goes under the road? The other comment I wanted to make is, let's not all ignore, you all have a bad problem now. The issue is this going to make it worse? This isn't going to solve your problem. You're still going to have really soggy conditions. They're not allowed to make it worse.
Right. Years ago, we asked.
One at a time, folks.
Sorry. Years ago, we asked if we could widen it. We were told no. We couldn't change the course of the water. We asked our neighbor that used to live next door to us, asked if he could put up a retaining wall. He was told no. Can't do anything to change how the water was and where it was. It was paid, it was approved, and that's how it has to stay. That's what we were told as residents.
If you're going to pursue further study, I would just have a suggestion that if they could study that stream also. That stream isn't limited to just the water coming off the back of the yard. The stream is, and several of you people here have been the long-time residents, and you're familiar with that area. It's a swamp. And you have a lot of water coming off that ridge that flows down through this gully, not a stream, not a deep stream. It's this little 4-foot thing that goes down 3-4 feet. And that water can flow into it. If this pipe has a negative effect, it's going to come in and increase the amount of water coming through at a very fast rate. That's my opinion. And if we could just include some of that in regards to the study to see what effect it will have on this gully, because that will have a direct effect on what happens on that pipe going underneath the winding mill and floods out across the street.
Is there something that could be done on the street level for their property to divert the water?
That would be a discussion with the town, I think.
Yeah, that's more than. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we did distribute a letter that was sent in for the record from Mr. Z. Federal Mayo at the meeting in Winding Meadow Drive. We were all given a copy of that, where he's voicing his concerns.
Yeah,
we have also forwarded that.
Okay, I'll tell you. Have you guys seen this? So there's some concern in there too. I hope you look at it and take that into consideration when you do your study. But if there's no other questions or comments from either this commission or from the residents, I'd like to make a motion to continue the public hearing until we get further information from the engineer.
Okay, Commissioner Rogan will make a motion to continue public hearing on application 2211W to get some further.
Okay, have a second. Second. All in favor? All right, everyone, we'll see you next month and hopefully have some new information we can.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Have a good night. John, you here? John?
I'm here, yes.
So you've been hearing the whole discussion, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, next is a regular meeting, application 22-01W, excuse me, 23-01W. Proposal by 175 West Main Street LLC to construct 3-lot residential subdivision within a wetland and upland review area on lot 16, block 127 at 235 Weathersfield Road.
Good evening. My name is Andy Stahoviak. I'm a professional engineer. Live in 74. Last 10 years before I semi-retired, worked for the town of Farmington. And the property owner is Matt and Ella Komferovich. I've asked Jack Martin, Bill Jackson, and myself to help them with issues. This past May, they bought a 1.8 acre lot on Weathersfield Road. And can I turn this a little?
Sure.
They bought this property on Weathersfield Road. This is north. It's a ranch style frame, wood frame, 3-bedroom ranch, single family home with a garage. And in 1995, it was part of a 9-lot subdivision that the owner at the time, Mary Felicia, came up with, and it was approved with these 3 lots here. But for some reason, at the last minute, Mrs. Felicia didn't go through with the subdivision here. This subdivision was contingent on water and sewer being brought this way and that way. So I don't know why, but she never went through. These 6 lots have been put in, and houses are all on these lots. Then she was the house there. So this is the same 3 lots and the house. So when she bought the house, I don't know what time she found out, but the last test, water test on the well, turned out bacterial contamination on her well. And the septic system was put in when the house was built in 1952, and as a 500-gallon steel tank and a leaching field that's over here. So originally these lots were open farmland, and then over time, houses started going up. And so the soils on this lot is that there's a rock outcropping, a ledge. The rock sort of tilts up, and it tilts up this way. So they built the house and the garage on the high spot. This part drains this way, and this part of the lot drains that way. So the high point for drainage is the road. Everything else drains down this way. The soils in this area are, they're a Ludlow and Wilbraham silt loam. One of the soils has a hard pan layer at 2 feet. So the glacial till ground up the rock, packed it, and over time, the top 2 feet got fluffed up through frost action, worms and all that. So once that soil in the top 2 feet gets soaked, then it starts running off all of it, and it doesn't soak down. It's like rock underneath. So when they found out that, their septic repair became very problematic and expensive. So they're looking at maybe $50,000 to $70,000 between the well and the septic system. And there's no guarantee that the septic system will work. The homeowner, not this lot, this is an empty lot, which is mostly wetland and wooded, but over here was able to put in 60% of the system because the health department will allow you to do your best effort to try to fix the septic system. But I don't know if they want to spend that much money, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. So in order to address the high costs of
this, they turned to the idea of subdividing this lot to where it was in 1995. And this is the proposal. So Jack prepared the